So hello and welcome to today's video, where today we're going to be going over some creepy and far-fetched bloody theories. Now please remember, for the love of God, don't take this too seriously. Like every single creepy video game theory, they're always just a tad far-fetched. So let's get on with it. Gary Smith was originally going to die at the end of the game. Now yes, this does sound like a cliche character dies theory, but please hear it out as there is a lot of evidence to support this. Back in the early 2010s, a member of Buddy Board named Madman claimed to have known a Rockstar insider who gave him information on the original ending that was planned for Buddy, and what Madman said was Gary Smith was originally planned to die, and the final showdown mission that we got went through numerous changes before Rockstar decided on the final version. Initially this theory didn't have much weight behind it other than being a beta rumour, but in 2017 and 2018 there were some discoveries made that gave a possibility to Gary's death being true. Now the first part came in the form of the soundtrack. Now strangely, in the game's files there was at least 3 versions of Final Showdown's music that was made. Final Showdown's first track is still used in the mission Rats in the Library, but the second track was cut entirely, and the third track, named MS Final Showdown 03, is the one we hear in the final game. Now this is solid evidence to support Madman's claims of Final Showdown having multiple versions. Now the 2018 findings however gave a lot more credit to their death. Now in the beta, there were 7 chapters to the game, but it was cut down to 6. Now at first people assumed this was because chapter 6 was initially just 3 missions, which was go see the principal, which is just a cutscene, complete mayhem, and final showdown, and it was far too short to warrant being its own chapter, so it was merged with chapter 5 instead, which is understandable. But bunny modder Deadpool XYZ was searching for mission markers, and he found the only remains of the 7th chapter and 2 mission markers. Now the first mission marker, known as 7_01, would have been the first mission of the chapter, and it would have taken place at the Preppies Beach Clubhouse. 7_02 doesn't exist however, but 7_03 does, and it would have taken place in the Bourth Cemetery next to the church. Now because of this, some people assume that this was the 7th chapter following on from the events of Gary's death, and the 3rd mission may have had something to do with Jimmy facing Gary's grave, which, given all the info we know of Beta Buddy in general, it's not far-fetched to believe the game would have been as dark as to deal with death in the epilogue. The only other item we do have that backs this up is how Gary is never really seen again. Now granted, none of the group leaders really are, but hanging around in free mode you'll often hear the jocks talk about Ted as if he hangs out with them, you'll hear the greasers talk about Johnny and where he might be, etc. But for Gary, no one actually knows where he is or what happened to him. And given the last time we saw him, he was practically motionless in Crabble Snitch's office, which definitely puts things into perspective. The strange man from Red Dead Redemption can be seen at the Freak Show. Now this is definitely one of the more obscure and far-fetched theories, especially as the first Red Dead came out about 4 or so years after Buddy, but here goes this theory nonetheless. If you head to the Freak Show at the carnival, find the Skeleton Man, equip your camera or super slingshot and zoom into the picture behind him. Now one of the people you can see appears to bear some resemblance to the strange man from Red Dead Redemption. Now if you've not played the first Red Dead, well, Redemption anyway, the strange man is very heavily implied to be a supernatural being, haunting John Marston in both Red Dead Redemption 1 during the I Know You side missions. In the I Know You side quests, this strange man knows all about John. He knows his name, he knows his past, and in Red Dead Redemption 2 there's an entire Easter egg dedicated to this strange man. Now during the final portion of the I Know You side quest from the first Red Dead, the final encounter with him takes place over John's future grave, where he remarks about this being a fine spot, while being incredibly cryptic, before walking off calmly as John empties 3 bullets into him, which seemingly do no harm to him. And many in the Red Dead community assume sealed John's, Abigail's and Uncle's fate for the grave. Now in the myth community, there are many theories to what this man is, some arguing he's deaf, others believing he could be the devil, God or Saint Peter. Now going back to Buddy, the Skeleton Man in his younger years was born into a very wealthy family, and one day, out of nowhere, he started losing weight explicitly. No medical facility ever found out what caused his strange weight loss. Now the main theory for this could be that his parents, or possibly even this man himself, may have made a pact with the devil to stay filthy rich, but knowing how deals with the devil work, this caused the man to lose all of those that he loved, as in his dialogue he mentions how his family and friends all left him and he's even shunned by the medical facility he was at, essentially forcing him to join the only group of people that would welcome him, a touring freak show, where he now spends his life on display to be gawped at by onlookers, which is a very fitting punishment for such a greedy pact. Now going back to the theories about the strange man again, in Red Dead Redemption 2, Armadillo has a breakout of cholera, and Herbert Moon is seemingly one of the very few people unaffected, which hints that Herbert is very lucky. However, if we decide to enter his store, we can see he has a portrait of the strange man behind him, and if questioned about it by John, he brushes it off quickly, saying that he really liked the portrait and it was given to him. if we go to speak to some of the residents, they will actually say that the man responsible for this outbreak had a top hat, a moustache and a black suit, matching the strange man's appearance. And given the skeleton man's incredibly sad and arguably cursed backstory, coupled with the strange man being seen as some kind of supernatural entity, the theory is the strange man may have had something to do with the skeleton man at the carnival. It's entirely possible that, given in Red Dead Redemption 2, it's heavily implied that Herbert Moon, the local racist shopkeeper, may have made some pact with him. So could the strange man be some kind of supernatural deity who brings grave misfortune to those he deals with? It's very possible. Edgar Munson would have killed Jimmy Hopkins in Showdown at the plant. Now, much like the Gary Smith theory, there is some evidence to back this up. In Showdown at the plant, there is a deleted portion of the mission where it's assumed Edgar Munson kills Jimmy by throwing him into acid during the boss fight if Jimmy loses. Because in the game's files, there's a few unused files by Edgar where he says the following:
"That burns, doesn't it? Nothing like a chemical your skin, huh, Jimmy? Poor little Jimmy taking an acid bath."
Now, while it could be assumed that this is possibly a deleted attack from Edgar where he throws something at Jimmy, there is something very interesting in an unused file which is much more damning. In the game's data files, specifically for this boss fight, there is an unused portion of code eerily named 5B, which is the mission ID for the Edgar boss fight. And one of the lines of code here is "fall into sludge." Now, if you travel to these coordinates and the interior ID, they're exactly over the pit of acid where Jimmy and Edgar have their fight. Because of this, it's hardly assumed there was a deleted scene where Edgar kills Jimmy by throwing him into acid, but this was deleted entirely from the game because of how twisted and dark this entire scene would have been. And as I said in my 2016 video about this, it could have been a really creepy bad ending to the game if you think of it. Jimmy gets framed for all this stuff he never did, he tries so hard to clear his name and he ends up dead because of it, with his name still in the mud. Happy Vault's Asylum is the front for a cult. Now, anybody who's played Bully knows just how insanely creepy and mysterious the Insane Asylum is. The entire game is light-hearted comedy, but the second you set foot inside this place, the happy comedic theme gets thrown out the window and we have one of the most unsettling places in a Rockstar game. Now, one of the major theories for the asylum is it's the front for a cult, and we do have a bit of evidence to support this theory. Now, in the mission Galloway Away, upon gaining access to the asylum, one of the inmates runs up to you and says something along the lines of "let's be friends, but don't anger the watcher," before the camera cuts to this statue. Now, this statue itself is a bit eerie too, as the statue is doing a pose which is something we typically see in a religious sense, and the statue is dressed in a robe, which is also something that's very commonplace in religious iconography. Upon damaging the statue's power source to distract the orderlies, Theo can actually be heard saying about how there's another Watcher stampede. Now, the inmate Otto's quote about not angering the Watcher definitely implies that this statue is some kind of god or other omnipotent being. The fact the orderlies acknowledge that this is the Watcher hints that something is up. Now, unlike other authority figures, the orderlies of the asylum are the only ones who actively drug anybody they see out of line. They just inject something into the neck which causes a person to faint near instantly, even Jimmy if he gets caught by them, so it shows they do not care who they drug, child or adult. And if you read up any cult stories about this, many of them do not hesitate to punish children in the same brutal and cruel ways as they do to adults. And if you want to get really far-fetched with this theory, we could take a look at Mr. Galloway when he's been incarcerated by them. When we find Mr. Galloway, not only is he in a really bad state, but he's muttering to himself how he must be a better person and how he's really pathetic when he sees Jimmy, before he quickly cowers away in fear and seems to shout a bit because he assumes that Jimmy is an orderly before calming down when he recognises him. Now, the reason I say this is because cults are known to make members view themselves as pathetic and worthless as a form of manipulation to keep them under the cult's thumb. And since Mr. Galloway is there against his will, it makes a lot of sense as to why he quickly cowers in fear upon assuming an orderly is at his cell. Jimmy Hopkins died at the end of Bully. And yes, this is definitely the most cliche character death theory, but once again we have to go over this anyway because I'm pretty sure it's mandatory in these kind of videos. Now, it's assumed that straight after the fall and final showdown, Jimmy Hopkins actually died and everything that takes place afterwards is either in purgatory or heaven. It's assumed that straight after the fall and final showdown, Jimmy Hopkins actually died and everything that takes place afterwards is in purgatory. Now, there are various different beliefs of purgatory in general, with some believing that in purgatory you're either not good enough for heaven or hell, or it's a waiting room with the other souls while you wait to discover your fate. However, some others believe that you may have died, but you're not aware of it yet, but your soul continues to live on in this weird place that strongly resembles where you lived to prevent you from realising that you've died. Now, in the case for Jimmy's death, this one does have a bit of info backing it up. Jimmy and Gary both fell from the same height. Yet in the next scene, Jimmy is perfectly fine, completely unscathed, while Gary is the only one who is seemingly hurt. As soon as Jimmy steps outside the academy, he's incredibly popular, nobody hates him anymore, and the girl he loved runs up to him and kisses him. Another interesting note as well is the final showdown fight takes place at night, but when Jimmy steps outside, it's daytime again. After the credits roll, we're introduced to End the Summer, where Jimmy essentially lives out the same 5 days over and over and over again. The weather never changes, and no one's attitude towards Jimmy ever changes anymore, and his parents never arrive to pick him up. Now, as mentioned earlier, one of the beliefs of purgatory is you're not good enough for heaven, or bad enough to enter hell, and as we progress through Bully, Jimmy does fit perfectly. He does stand up for the bullied, and he offers to help out many people out of his own will. But at the same time, Jimmy enacts revenge on those who wronged him for very little reason. He assaults people, bullies people, and vandalises people's property, etc. And another theory is that this could be heaven. Now, while most people tend to think of heaven as pearly white gates, God and Jesus, and a place full of other past loved ones, some theories believe that Jimmy's in heaven following his fall, which is why he's no longer hated by everybody. His love comes up to him and kisses him, and it's why everything is now at peace and Jimmy's living the good life, as he puts it. Jimmy is dead and in his own definition of heaven, which also explains why we never see the rights being broken up or know what happened to Gary, Russell, Edgar from the last time we saw them, etc. So those are the creepy buddy theories I could find, and I'm aware that some of these were really far-fetched, but you know, that's the point of these theories. So yeah, that's it for today's video. Hope you enjoyed and thank you for watching.